In the quiet neighborhoods of Toronto during the late 1970s, a teenage boy could often be found gliding down the sidewalk on a skateboard, his dark hair tousled by the wind, a bass guitar slung over his shoulder like a second skin. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't even sure what he wanted, only that he didn't want to stay still. School felt like a cage. Letters on the page swam together, making reading slow and frustrating. Teachers called it a learning difference. He just called it hard. By the time he was 17, he'd had enough. He walked out, not in anger, but with a quiet certainty that there had to be another way to live. His mother watched him with a mix of pride and worry. She'd raised him mostly on her own, moving from country to country, Lebanon, New York, back to Canada, always chasing work, always rebuilding. She was an actress and costume designer, someone who understood the pull of creativity but also the cost. She'd seen dreams crumble under rent bills and rejection letters. His father had left when he was just a small child, and though there were occasional postcards or distant phone calls, he was more of a ghost than a parent. So it fell to her, and later a kind stepfather who worked in theater to guide him. They gave him space, but not without concern. When he told them he wanted to drop out and chase acting, not as a side gig, but as his whole life, they didn't yell. They didn't slam doors. They just sat quietly at the kitchen table, the kind with chipped paint and mismatched chairs, and asked, "Are you sure?" He nodded. He didn't have a plan, not really. No agent, no connections, no fancy headshots. Just a stubborn belief that stories mattered, and that maybe, just maybe, he could be part of telling them. His stepfather, a man who'd spent decades in the theater world, tried to prepare him. "It's not like the movies," he said gently. "Most people don't make it. And even if you do, it might not look the way you imagine." The boy listened, but his mind was already elsewhere, already picturing himself on a stage, or in front of a camera saying words that meant something. He wasn't dreaming of red carpets or magazine covers. He just wanted to feel alive in his work, to do something that didn't feel like pretending. He started small. Local plays, student films, anything that would let him act. He worked odd jobs to pay for rent and food, washing dishes in greasy diners, cleaning offices at night, even selling Christmas trees during the holidays. He slept on couches, borrowed clothes for auditions, and learned to stretch a single meal into two. There were days when doubt crept in, when the rejections piled up like unread mail and he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. But then he'd land a tiny role, a few lines in a community theater production, a background part in a low-budget film, and that spark would return. It wasn't fame. It wasn't money. It was the feeling of being seen even for just a moment as someone real. Back home, his family watched from a distance. His mother saved every newspaper clipping, no matter how small. His younger sister, fighting her own quiet battle with illness, would call him just to hear his voice, to ask about his latest audition. She believed in him more than anyone. "You're going to do something special," she'd say, her voice thin but sure. He'd laugh it off, but her words stayed with him, like a compass in the fog. Still, the path wasn't smooth. He struggled with reading scripts, often needing friends to record lines so he could memorize them by ear. He missed social cues sometimes, coming across as shy or aloof when he was just trying to process everything. But people who worked with him noticed something unusual. He listened. Really listened. He didn't talk over others. He asked questions. He showed up early and stayed late. In an industry full of egos, his humility stood out, not as weakness, but as quiet strength. By the mid-1980s, he scraped together enough for a one-way bus ticket to Los Angeles. He packed a duffel bag with a few changes of clothes, his bass guitar, and a notebook filled with scribbled thoughts and lines from plays he loved. His mother hugged him tightly at the station, her eyes glistening but dry. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself," she said. He promised. He didn't know if he could keep it, but he meant it with everything he had. Los Angeles was louder, brighter, and lonelier than he expected. The palm trees looked beautiful in postcards, but under the real sun, the city felt vast and indifferent. He rented a tiny room in a shared apartment, the kind where you could hear your neighbors arguing through the walls. He took any job that paid, even if it meant scrubbing floors or folding laundry at a hotel. At night, he'd study scripts under a dim lamp, mouthing the words slowly, carefully, until they felt like his own. Auditions were brutal. He'd walk into casting offices in thrift store suits, trying to ignore the polished actors who seemed to belong there more than he did. Sometimes he'd get a call back. More often he'd get silence. But he kept going. Not because he thought success was guaranteed, but because stopping felt worse than failing. Then came a break. Not the kind that changes your life overnight, but the kind that whispers, "Keep going." A director saw him in a small theater production and offered him a role in a film called River's Edge. It was dark, raw, and unlike anything he'd done before. He played a troubled teenager caught in a moral crisis, and he poured everything he had into it. His confusion, his longing, his fear of becoming invisible. When the film premiered, critics noticed. Not him specifically, not yet, but the performance stood out. People started asking, who's that kid? Back in Toronto, his family read the reviews with growing awe. This wasn't the goofy sidekick they'd seen in local plays. This was something deeper, something real. His mother called him, her voice trembling slightly. "You did it," she said. He laughed softly. "I'm just getting started," he replied. But Hollywood had its own ideas. Soon after, he was cast in a goofy time travel comedy called Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It was silly, full of air guitars and catchphrases, and it became a surprise hit. Suddenly, he was Ted, the lovable slacker with a heart of gold. Fans loved him. Studios wanted more. But inside, he felt uneasy. He hadn't trained for years, struggled through poverty, and faced down doubt just to play the same character over and over. He turned down offers for sequels and similar roles even when the paychecks were huge. His agents were frustrated. "You're throwing away your shot," they warned. But he couldn't shake the feeling that if he said yes to everything, he'd lose himself in the noise. His family, watching from afar, didn't fully understand. They saw fame, money, opportunity. They didn't see the quiet war inside him, the fight to stay true to why he started in the first place. When he called home, his voice was tired but steady. "I know it looks strange," he told his mother once, "but I'd rather be unknown and honest than famous and fake." She didn't argue. She just said, "Then keep being honest." And so he did, even when it meant sleeping on floors, even when it meant walking away from millions, even when the world expected him to become someone else. Because from the very beginning in that kitchen in Toronto, he'd made a choice, not just about a career, but about the kind of person he wanted to be. His family hadn't anticipated it, but they were starting to see this wasn't just a decision. It was who he was. Los Angeles in the mid-1980s was a city of dreams and dead ends. For the young man who'd just arrived with a duffel bag and a bass guitar, it felt more like the latter, especially on days when the bus didn't come, the audition got canceled, or the diner he worked at cut his hours. He lived in a tiny room with peeling wallpaper and a window that rattled every time a truck passed. But he didn't complain. He'd made his choice, and he was going to stick with it, no matter how long it took. He took whatever work he could find. Dishwashing in a back alley restaurant where the grease never fully washed off his hands. Cleaning offices at night, pushing a mop down silent hallways while the city slept. He even sold Christmas trees one winter, standing in the cold for hours, hands numb, smiling at strangers who barely glanced his way. Money was tight, but he never asked his family for help. He wanted to do this on his own, not out of pride, but because he needed to prove to himself that he could. Then came River's Edge. It wasn't a big movie. Most people never saw it, but for him it was everything. He played a quiet, confused teenager caught in the aftermath of a friend's crime. There were no explosions, no jokes, no easy answers, just raw emotion, silence, and the weight of choices. He poured his own loneliness, his doubts, his fear of not belonging into the role. When the film premiered at a small festival, a few critics noticed. "He's got something real," one wrote. That line stuck with him. Real. That's all he ever wanted to be. But Hollywood doesn't always reward real. Not right away, anyway. Soon after, he was offered a part in a goofy comedy about two airheaded teenagers who travel through time to pass history class. The script was full of woes and excellence and ridiculous stunts. He almost said no. It felt too light, too silly, nothing like the serious work he dreamed of doing. But his agent insisted. "It's a foot in the door," they said. "You can do the heavy stuff later." So he agreed. He gave it his all, even if the lines made him cringe. He practiced the goofy grin in the mirror. He learned to play the guitar badly on purpose. And when Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure hit theaters in 1989, Something unexpected happened. People loved it. Not just liked it, loved it. Kids quoted his lines. T-shirts appeared. Suddenly, he wasn't just another struggling actor. He was Ted. Overnight, his life changed. Offers poured in. More comedies, teen movies, talk show appearances. Studios wanted him to keep playing the lovable slacker. They offered big paychecks, fancy cars, even a chance to host a late-night show. But the more they pushed him into that box, the more he pulled away. He turned down sequels. He walked away from roles that felt empty. His agents grew frustrated. "You're throwing away your moment," they warned. But he couldn't shake the feeling that if he kept saying yes to everything, he'd disappear inside the character, until there was nothing left of the real him. Back home, his family watched with mixed emotions. On one hand, they were proud. Their boy was on magazine covers. Strangers recognized him on the street. But on the other hand, they worried. Was this really what he wanted? Was he happy? His mother called often, not to give advice, but just to listen. "Are you sleeping?" she'd ask. "Are you eating?" He'd laugh and say yes, even when the answer was no. What they didn't know, what few people knew, was that he was quietly fighting to stay grounded. He still took the bus. He still cooked his own meals. He gave most of his early earnings to his sister, who was battling a serious illness. He visited her whenever he could, sitting by her hospital bed, holding her hand, telling her silly stories to make her smile. Acting wasn't just a job for him. It was a way to connect, to bring light into dark places. And that mattered more than any paycheck. Then came Parenthood in 1989, a film about family, messiness, love, and second chances. He played a quiet, thoughtful boyfriend with dreams of becoming a professional baseball player. It was a small role, but he treated it like the lead. He studied baseball for weeks, practiced his swing, talked to real players. He wanted to honor the character, not just fill a slot. People noticed the difference. Even in a supporting part, he brought depth. Critics started calling him surprisingly nuanced. Fans began to see there was more beneath the surface. Still, the industry kept trying to fit him into molds. After Bill and Ted, they wanted him to be the funny guy. After Parenthood, they wanted him to be the sensitive one. But he refused to be labeled. He chased roles that challenged him, like the troubled musician in My Own Private Idaho, a film so raw and unconventional that many studios wouldn't touch it. He worked for almost no pay, slept in cheap motels during filming, and spent hours talking with real street kids to understand their lives. The film flopped at the box office, but it earned him respect among serious filmmakers. More importantly, it reminded him why he started acting in the first place. Not for fame, but for truth. Through it all, he stayed humble. He remembered the names of crew members. He thanked the caterers. He showed up early and stayed late. In a town where people often treated others like stepping stones, he treated everyone like equals. That didn't go unnoticed. Directors began requesting him not just for his talent, but for his kindness. "He's the same guy whether the cameras are rolling or not," one crew member said years later. By the early 1990s, he was working steadily, but still not made it in the way Hollywood measures success. No mansion, no entourage, no headlines about wild parties. Just work, quiet dedication, and a growing reputation as someone you could trust with a scene, with a secret, with your time. Then came Speed. It was an action movie. Fast cars, explosions, a ticking bomb on a bus. Not the kind of film he usually chose. But the script had heart. His character wasn't just a hero. He was scared, smart, and deeply human. He trained for months, learning to drive stunt vehicles, doing his own jumps, pushing his body to the limit. He didn't have to. He could have used a double. But he believed if the audience was going to believe in the danger, he had to feel it too. When Speed exploded in theaters in 1994, everything changed, again. This time it wasn't just kids quoting lines. It was everyone. He became a global star overnight. Magazines called him the thinking man's action hero. Studios offered him $10 million per film. Private jets. Endorsement deals. A whole new life. But even as the world celebrated, his family saw the strain. He was exhausted, overwhelmed, haunted by the pressure to keep rising. And then, just as his career hit its peak, his personal life began to unravel. His longtime girlfriend, the mother of his unborn child, faced a devastating loss. Their baby was stillborn. The grief was crushing, He held her through the night, silent, present, carrying pain he couldn't fix. He didn't talk about it in interviews. He didn't post about it online. There was no social media then, but even if there had been, he wouldn't have used it. His pain was private, sacred. Not long after, his girlfriend died in a car accident. Just like that, she was gone. The world kept spinning, but for him, time stopped. He withdrew, canceled projects, avoided the spotlight. While tabloids speculated, he sat in silence, trying to make sense of a world that felt suddenly fragile. His family, watching from afar, finally understood. This wasn't just about acting anymore. This was about survival, about holding on to kindness in the face of unbearable loss. They didn't call with advice. They just sent letters, care packages, quiet reminders. We're here. And through it all, he never stopped showing up, for his sister, for his work, for the people who needed him. Even when his heart was breaking, he gave what he could. Because that's who he'd always been. Not the star. Not the slacker. Not the action hero. Just a man who believed that how you treat people matters more than how famous you become. And though his family hadn't anticipated this path, this mix of fame, heartbreak, and quiet courage, they were beginning to see. His choices weren't reckless. They were rooted in something deeper than success. They were rooted in love. The 1990s should have been the golden years. After Speed became a worldwide hit, everything seemed to line up. The big roles, the leading man status, the kind of fame most actors spend lifetimes chasing. But life rarely follows a script, especially not one written in Hollywood. Just as the spotlight burned brightest, shadows began to gather around him. It started with the loss of his child. The baby, a daughter, was stillborn. There were no words big enough to hold that kind of pain. He and his partner had dreamed of her, painted her room, whispered hopes into the dark. And then silence. He didn't speak about it publicly. He never posted photos or made statements. He just carried it quietly like a stone in his chest. Friends said he became even more gentle after that, as if he understood now how fragile everything really was. Then, less than 2 years later, his partner was gone too, killed in a car crash on a rainy Los Angeles night. One moment she was there, the next she wasn't. The world kept moving, but for him, time felt broken. He attended the funeral in a dark suit, eyes red-rimmed, saying little. Reporters snapped photos from a distance, but he gave them nothing to quote. No dramatic outbursts, no tearful interviews, just silence. And in that silence, something shifted inside him. At the same time, his younger sister's health was worsening. She'd been fighting leukemia for years, moving in and out of hospitals, enduring treatments that left her weak but never broke her spirit. He'd always been close to her. More than siblings, they were confidants, allies in a world that often felt too loud. Now, with his own heart shattered, he turned his focus to her. While the industry buzzed about his next blockbuster, he was sitting in hospital rooms, holding her hand, reading to her, researching new treatments late into the night. He didn't talk about it. He never posted updates or asked for prayers, but those who saw him during those years noticed the change. He'd cancel meetings to be at her bedside. He'd fly across the country between film shoots just to spend a few hours with her. Money meant nothing if it couldn't buy her more time. So he spent it, freely, quietly, funding experimental therapies, paying for specialists, covering bills without a second thought. At one point, he even sold his Porsche, not for publicity, but because he needed the cash for her care. When asked about it later, he simply said, "It was just a car." His family watched all this with a mix of heartbreak and awe. They'd once worried he was chasing a dream that would leave him empty. Now they saw him pouring everything he had, his time, his energy, his love, into the people who mattered most. Fame hadn't hardened him. Grief hadn't made him bitter. If anything, it had deepened his kindness. During this time, he still worked. He couldn't afford not to, but he chose roles carefully, only the ones that felt meaningful or at least honest. He turned down massive paychecks for sequels and superhero films, not out of arrogance, but because he needed space to breathe. He took smaller parts in indie films, worked with first-time directors, showed up on set with the same humility he'd had when he was washing dishes. Crew members often said he was the first to arrive and the last to leave, always asking, "What do you need?" Whether it was a cup of coffee for a tired grip or a listening ear for a nervous extra. Then came The Matrix. It was a strange script, part philosophy, part sci-fi, part martial arts fantasy. Most big stars passed on it. Too weird, they said. Too risky. But he saw something in it. A story about choice, about waking up, about fighting for what's real. He trained for months, learning kung fu, doing wire work, pushing his body beyond its limits. He didn't complain when he got injured. He just got back up. He believed in the project, and that belief was contagious. When the film released in 1999, it changed everything. Not just for him, but for cinema itself. Audiences were stunned. Critics raved. Overnight, he wasn't just a star, he was Neo, the quiet hero who chose truth over comfort. The role fit him like a second skin. People saw themselves in his stillness, his courage, his refusal to look away from hard truths. But while the world celebrated, he was still living in the quiet aftermath of loss. He bought a modest apartment, not a mansion. He still took cabs, still tipped generously, still remembered the names of the people who worked behind the scenes. And when it came time to negotiate his pay for the Matrix sequels, he did something almost unheard of in Hollywood. He walked away from tens of millions of dollars to ensure the crew, the special effects artists, the costume designers, the stunt coordinators got paid fairly. He knew how hard they'd worked. He'd been one of them once. He wouldn't let them be forgotten now. His family heard about it secondhand, from a friend of a friend or a small article buried in a trade magazine. They weren't surprised. It was just who he was. But they also knew the cost. Every time he chose kindness over profit. Every time he put his sister's needs before his career. Every time he sat alone with his grief instead of selling it to the tabloids, he was making a choice that most people wouldn't understand. And that was okay. He wasn't doing it for them. What kept him going, those close to him say, was his sister. Even on her hardest days, she'd crack jokes, ask about his latest project, tell him to stop being so serious. She was his anchor. And he was hers. They didn't need grand gestures, just presence, just showing up. There were moments, though, when the weight felt too heavy. Nights when he'd sit on his balcony, staring at the city lights, wondering how to keep moving forward. But he never gave up. Not on her, not on himself, not on the belief that even in the darkest times you could still choose to be kind. And that's what his family began to see. Not the fame, not the headlines, but the quiet strength in how he lived. He didn't wear his pain on his sleeve. He didn't use it as an excuse. He carried it, yes, but he also made space for joy, for laughter with his sister, for quiet walks in the park, for helping a stranger carry groceries. Years later, when asked how he got through those years, he'd just shrug and say, "You do what you have to do." No drama, no self-pity, just truth. Because in the end, it wasn't about being a movie star. It was about being human, flawed, grieving, but still reaching out a hand when someone else was falling. And that, more than any role he ever played, was his real legacy. After The Matrix became a global phenomenon, the world expected him to disappear into luxury. Private jets, gated estates, designer everything. That's what usually happens when someone becomes one of the highest paid actors on the planet. But instead of chasing more fame or building a fortress of wealth, he did something almost unheard of. He gave it away. It wasn't a grand announcement. There were no press releases, no photo ops with oversized checks. He just quietly redirected a huge portion of his earnings, tens of millions of dollars, from the Matrix sequels straight to the people who helped make the films possible. The special effects team, the costume designers, the stunt performers, the grips and electricians who worked 16-hour days in freezing warehouses or scorching sound stages, they all got bonuses, some life-changing. One crew member later said it was the first time in 20 years he could pay off his mortgage without worrying. Another used the money to send his daughter to college. None of them expected it, but he remembered what it felt like to be on the other side, to work hard and wonder if it would ever be enough. His family heard about it through whispers, not headlines. At first, they couldn't believe it. "You gave how much away?" his mother asked during a rare phone call. He just laughed softly. "They earned it," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And to him it was. He'd never forgotten where he came from. The bus rides, the dishwashing jobs, the nights sleeping on couches. Success hadn't changed that. If anything, it made him more aware of how lucky he was, and how much others had sacrificed so he could stand in the spotlight. He didn't buy a mansion, He rented a simple apartment in a quiet part of the city. He still rode the subway when he could, often unrecognized in a baseball cap and worn jacket. When fans approached him, he didn't brush them off. He listened. He asked how they were doing. Sometimes he'd even sit with them for a few minutes just talking like old friends. People walked away stunned, not because they'd met a movie star, but because they'd met someone who made them feel seen. He also poured money into causes that mattered to him, especially cancer research. His sister's long battle had shown him how broken the system could be, how expensive, how exhausting, how full of dead ends. So he funded clinical trials, supported patient care programs, and quietly covered medical bills for families who couldn't afford treatment. He never asked for credit. In fact, he often insisted his name not be attached at all. "It's not about me," he'd say. "It's about helping." This baffled a lot of people in Hollywood. In an industry built on branding and self-promotion, his refusal to take bows for his generosity seemed almost radical. But to those who knew him, it made perfect sense. He'd never been in it for the glory. Even at the height of his fame, he turned down talk shows, avoided red carpets when he could, and rarely gave interviews. When he did speak, he deflected praise. "I'm just doing my job," he'd say, or anyone would do the same. But the truth was, most wouldn't. And that's what made it so powerful. His family, watching from afar, began to understand something they hadn't before. His decision to pursue acting all those years ago wasn't just about wanting to be on screen. It was about wanting to live a life that meant something, where success wasn't measured in dollars or followers, but in how you treated people when no one was watching. They saw it in the way he showed up for his sister, even during his busiest filming schedules. They saw it in the way he remembered the name of a nurse who'd cared for her years earlier and sent her a thank you note out of the blue. They saw it in the way he'd cancel a high-profile event to sit with a grieving friend, just to be there. And they saw it in how he lived day to day. No bodyguards, no entourage, just a man walking through the world with his eyes open, ready to help if he could. Once a fan spotted him at a diner looking tired after a long shoot. She hesitated, then asked for a photo. He smiled, stood up, and not only took the picture but asked how her day was going. When she mentioned she was stressed about school, he listened, really listened, and offered a few kind words that stayed with her for years. Stories like that kept popping up, not because he sought them out, but because he couldn't help being who he was. Even his choices in work reflected this shift. He started saying yes to smaller films, quiet dramas, character-driven stories, projects that didn't promise box office gold but offered something real. He worked with young directors who had passion but no budget. He took pay cuts so the films could get made. If the story matters, he'd say, then it's worth telling. Of course, not everyone understood. Some agents dropped him, frustrated by his lack of interest in building his brand. Studios passed on him for big franchises, thinking he wasn't hungry enough. But he didn't mind. He'd already proven he could be a star. Now he wanted to be something else, something quieter, deeper, more lasting. His mother, in one of their rare interviews, finally put it into words. "We didn't anticipate this. We worried he'd get lost in Hollywood, but instead he found himself. And in doing so, he showed us all what really matters. That was the heart of it. His journey hadn't been about escaping his past or chasing some glittering future. It had been about staying true to his values, to his loved ones, to the belief that kindness is its own kind of power. And the more the world tried to turn him into a symbol, the nicest guy in Hollywood, the mysterious philosopher star, the more he resisted. He didn't want to be put on a pedestal. He just wanted to be human, flawed, grieving, generous, and trying his best. So while others built empires, he built connections. While others chased headlines, he chose humility. And in a world that often rewards noise, he spoke loudest through his actions. His family didn't fully get it at first. They'd expected fame to change him, maybe make him distant or proud or too busy to call. Instead, he became more present, more grounded, more himself. And that, more than any award or box office record, was the real surprise. Because in the end, the decision they hadn't anticipated, the one to walk away from easy money, to live simply, to give. Now in his late 50s, he moves through the world with the same quiet presence he always has. No fanfare, no entourage, just a man walking down the street like anyone else. If you passed him on a sidewalk, you might not even recognize him. He wears the same kind of clothes he wore decades ago. Simple jeans, a plain t-shirt, maybe a worn leather jacket. No designer labels. No flashy watches. Just comfort and maybe a little history stitched into the fabric. People still stop him, of course. Not with screams or demands, but with soft voices and hesitant smiles. "Excuse me. Are you?" And he always stops. Always turns. Always says, "Yeah, that's me." Then he listens. Really listens. As they tell him how a movie helped them through a hard time, or how his quiet strength gave them hope when they felt lost. He doesn't rush them. He doesn't glance at his watch. He stands there, present, as if this moment matters more than any meeting or premiere. That's the thing about him. Fame never made him distant. If anything, it made him more aware of how fleeting everything is. Time, health, the people we love. He learned that lesson the hard way, through losses that would have broken most people. But instead of closing off, he opened up. He chose kindness not as a performance, but as a practice, a daily decision. He still acts, but only when the story moves him. He's turned down massive paychecks for superhero roles and big-budget sequels, not out of pride, but because he's learned to protect his peace. He'd rather spend a month filming a small indie drama with a first-time director than headline a franchise that doesn't speak to him. And when he does take a role, he shows up the same way he always has. Early, prepared, respectful to everyone on set, from the lead actress to the person serving coffee. His home is modest. No sprawling estate, no pool with underwater lighting. Just a quiet space filled with books, a few guitars, and photos of people he loves. Some still here, many gone. He keeps their memories close, not in grand displays, but in the way he lives. He still funds cancer research in his sister's name. Still quietly helps families struggling with medical bills. Still shows up at hospitals when he hears someone needs a lift, not as a celebrity but as a friend. And he's still riding the subway. Still eating at diners. Still tipping generously. Not because he has to, but because he remembers what it's like to count every dollar. Once a waitress recognized him and nervously asked if he wanted anything special. He smiled and said, "Just your usual coffee and whatever you recommend for breakfast." She laughed, relaxed, and they chatted like old neighbors. That's the magic of him. He makes people feel ordinary in the best possible way. Like they belong. His family is smaller now. His sister, after a decades-long fight with illness, passed away a few years back. It was a quiet goodbye, surrounded by love, just as she'd wanted. He held her hand until the end, just like he always had. There were no public statements, no tearful interviews. Just grief, honored in silence. But those who know him say he carries her with him. In the way he pauses before making a decision. In the way he still orders her favorite tea when he's feeling low. In the way he smiles when he hears a certain song on the radio. His mother, now in her 80s, lives quietly back east. They talk often. Long phone calls that wander from movies to memories to the weather. She doesn't ask for much, just to hear his voice. And he gives her that freely, regularly. Because after everything, the fame, the loss, the noise of the world, he knows what lasts: connection, presence, love that shows up, day after day, without needing applause. People sometimes wonder why he never married again, why he doesn't have children of his own. But those who know him say he doesn't see his life as lacking. He's built a different kind of family, one made of loyalty, shared silence, and acts of quiet care. He's the friend who shows up with soup when you're sick, the one who remembers your dog's name, the one who listens without trying to fix you. That's his legacy more than any film or award. And yet the world keeps trying to label him the internet's boyfriend, Hollywood's nicest guy, the philosopher in a leather jacket. He laughs at these titles. Not bitterly, just with a gentle shake of his head, like someone watching a well-meaning but slightly off-target cartoon. He doesn't want to be a symbol. He just wants to be real. In a time when so much feels performative, where kindness is often posted for likes and grief is turned into content, he stands out because he refuses to play the game. He doesn't share his pain online. He doesn't monetize his story. He lives it quietly, honestly, and lets that be enough. Young actors sometimes ask him for advice. He never gives long speeches. Just simple things: be kind to the crew. Show up on time. Don't confuse attention with love. And then he'll ask about their dreams, their fears, their favorite books. He makes it about them, not him. That's the thread that runs through his whole life. From the kid who dropped out of school because he couldn't sit still, to the global star who gives away millions without telling a soul. He's always believed that how you treat people is the truest measure of who you are, not your bank account, not your follower count, not even your talent. His family, looking back now, finally understands. They didn't anticipate this path, not the fame, not the heartbreak, not the quiet generosity that became his compass. But they see it clearly now. His decision all those years ago wasn't reckless. It was rooted in something deep and true. He didn't chase stardom to escape his life. He stepped into it to live more fully, to connect, to serve, to stay human in a world that often rewards the opposite. And maybe that's why people still care. Not because he's perfect, he's not, but because he's proof that you can go through fire and still choose light. That you can lose everything and still give. That you can be famous and still be kind. He doesn't need statues or headlines. His legacy is in the waitress who felt seen, the crew member who paid off his debt, the stranger who kept going because of a role he played, the sister who never doubted his love. He walks through the world lightly, but leaves deep footprints. And when he's asked years later if he'd do it all again, the struggle, the loss, the choices that confused everyone, he just smiles that soft, knowing smile and says, in a heartbeat. Because for him, it was never about becoming someone the world admired. It was about becoming someone he could live with, and in that, he succeeded, not with noise but with grace, not with grand gestures, but with a lifetime of small, steady acts of love. And that, more than anything, is the story worth telling.